Hello, everybody. Thank you for deciding to take a look at our webcast. My name is Matt Marcellino, and Tara Harrawood will also be speaking and giving some brilliant ideas and thoughts for business owners with regard to starting and then ultimately growing your business from a single member to a multi-member LLC. We are attorneys here at Marcellino & Tyson. Our office is in Charlotte, North Carolina. We handle primarily North Carolina matters when it comes to business transaction matters. The law firm handles a bunch of other stuff, and you can check out our website at the end of this. We do also drop down into South Carolina, which is only a few miles away from us. One of the attorneys here in the office can handle those things with regard to your business matters. But again, things to be thinking about with regard to starting and growing your business from a single to multi-member LLC. Would start with some of the more simpler tasks on the front end, things that you should be considering, but they're things you should not overlook and are very important. And Tara is going to jump into that aspect and give us a little rundown on the startup process.
Great. So the first thing that many people do whenever they are thinking about starting a business is to reach out to an attorney. And we highly encourage that. We love it when people come to us on the front end because it helps us to eliminate a lot of problems that you may run into later if we can be involved from the beginning. And as lawyers do, what we're going to do in the beginning is ask you what seems to be a million questions. And that's so that we make sure that we are helping to set you up for long-term success. And one of the first questions that we're going to ask you is, what type of entity is it that you want to be, assuming you haven't started yet? Do you want to be a sole proprietorship? Is it just you? Do you want to be a partnership? Do you want to have an LLC? Do you want to have a corporation? If so, what type of corporation do you want to be? If you're going to be an LLC, how many members are we going to have? What's the ownership interest going to be? And all of those questions are so that we can help you to sort out and figure out what sort of protections and abilities do I want for myself and for my company, and which structure helps me to attain that in the best way. And of course, a lot of the reason that you're going to pick the particular structure that you do is going to be for taxes. So we're going to tell you that you need to have a good CPA involved from the beginning, probably. We all want to know what can be deducted and how do I generate the most income for my business, but you also want to have someone like that involved so that you can make sure that you are staying on top of your financial obligations as a business as well, so you don't get in the hole later on. So the type of entity that you want to be, that's one of the first things that we are going to try to figure out. And then we want to talk about what kind of organizational documents do you need for that? Do you need a partnership agreement? Do you need bylaws? Do you need to file articles of organization or of incorporation? Do you need a shareholder agreement? And the important part about these documents is they are going to govern a lot of ways that the business runs, but they are also, and probably more importantly, going to give you a roadmap for how to effectuate change within your business if and as necessary. And Matt's going to talk later on about how do I expand my business, growing your LLC. And those organizational documents that we have in the beginning are going to help explain and lay out for you how you do that. And then one final thing that we want to talk about in the beginning of setting up and establishing your business is, do I need and do I have a registered agent for my business? And there's a lot of things that are going to want to come into play for that. So a registered agent, just briefly what that means, is that's someone that you're putting in control of receiving mailings for your business, basically, and sorting through those things. Now, you can, of course, serve as your own registered agent. That's perfectly acceptable. Your attorney can serve as your registered agent. You can hire someone else to serve as your registered agent. And there's a lot of things that want to go into your thought process for if you need or if you have a registered agent. If you are a very organized person that's great at checking your mail and great at responding to mail that you received, then you can probably serve as your own registered agent, no problem. If you would rather entrust your attorney to do that and are good at reading the emails or accepting the phone calls and returning the phone calls from your attorney, then your attorney can serve as your registered agent. If you need help, if you know keeping track of things and administrative duties are not my strong suit, then maybe you want to hire someone to serve in that role as registered agent, because if in the unfortunate event your business is involved in a lawsuit, your registered agent is who is going to be served. If there are important mailings or filings that come to you, those your registered agent is going to accept those. So those are a lot of the things you want to think about. And then finally, filings with the North Carolina Secretary of State. These are things that you have to do for your business. The reason is you have to put the state on notice that you're operating a business. They want to know, and you have to tell them. And then there are annual filings that you have to keep up with, and that's really important. And your attorney should make sure they're on top of that, to make sure you're aware of the filings, when they have to be done, and making sure you're getting those done. Because if you don't stay up to date with your filings, then you're not in compliance and you risk not being protected by the statutes that are meant to protect businesses within the state. So those are all things that we want to consider in the beginning of starting a business. There's many different professionals that you want to have involved, but most importantly, you want to make sure you're talking to your attorney and making sure that you have a punch list of everything to consider whenever you're going to start something like this. And I think Matt's going to talk to you a little bit more about how to start it and how to grow it.
Yeah, exactly. Like on the front end, when you're actually trying to start a business in North Carolina, you're like Tara pointed out, you're going to have to make certain filings with the Secretary of State. If you're going to go an LLC, you file articles of an organization. If you're going to do an Inc. or a company or a C Corp, you're going to file articles of incorporation. They're uniquely different. You know, I would say 85 to 90% of companies right now that are beginning in North Carolina are going to be LLCs. They're easier to manage internally. You notice on one of the slides that was briefly touched on, you see filings and meetings and fees. The fees are typically a little bit less with an LLC with regard to meetings, i.e. keeping minutes and other internal corporate governance matters. You know, the LLC is a little bit more laid back. It has fewer requirements, whereas a C Corp or something that is incorporated has more requirements, such as meetings, shareholder meetings, potentially docking your minutes within the corporate books, etc. So if you're, you know, but the distinction between an LLC and a C Corp with regard to statutory protections, meaning trying to protect you from lawsuits or creditors, etc. You know, the purpose of, well, primarily an LLC is, you know, the assets and the debts of the LLC are separate from yours, right? So you have personal protection, presuming you do everything correctly, where you're not subject to essentially the debts of the LLC. So if the LLC has a debt, the debt belongs to the LLC, not you individually, so you're protected there. There's other reasons why you want to file an LLC for personal protection. Similar with the C Corp, but from a corporate governance matter, you know, once you decide, like, well, do I need to be a corporation or an LLC? So an LLC primarily has just 100% membership interest, right? And it's you and a buddy, you go 50-50, or maybe it's just you at 100%. You know, corporations would actually have shares, and you would determine, well, how many shares do I want to issue? How many shares do I want to keep in reserve? And these are things that you might be able to use down the line to be able to generate maybe some capital or revenue from an investor standpoint. It's typically something for a company that might become quite larger than where it starts. LLCs are, you know, quite possibly smaller companies where you just have a handful of owners of that company. Again, you only have 100% interest. You can even call them member shares if you wanted to, but there's only 100% that you can dole out. So from an investor standpoint, you got to remember, if you're giving away membership interest in your LLC, you got to be really careful as to where you want to keep that line with regard to the ability to control the company. And we'll talk about growing it here in a second. The corporate governance documents for an LLC are really not required outside of filing your annual report with the Secretary of State. roughly every time you file your tax returns, just letting the state know that you're still in business and you're operating. With regard to the other filings with the Secretary of State, that registered agent, that's a really important detail. And what Tara means by mail going to the company, it's really kind of like certified mail. Lawsuits, if the company's being served with a lawsuit, or if there's some type of creditor issue, they may try to serve it through the registered agent. That individual needs to be, or entity, it can be a company, needs to have a North Carolina address. So it can't be somewhere else. If you're an LLC, if you're a foreign company coming into North Carolina to operate, even as an LLC, you'll still need to get a North Carolina registered agent to be able to accept service essentially on your behalf. A lot of third parties will do that just as a means to perfect service if there is an issue that does require litigation or a complaint. So if you're very well organized, yeah, you can be the registered agent. There's companies that also handle it. Your attorney can, if you have an attorney that helps you set it up, or hire an attorney later to serve as that registered agent, you can do that as well, and they can accept service or be served on your behalf. Within the corporate governance between an LLC and a C Corp is, bylaws, shareholder agreements are typically associated with the C Corp. An LLC might have an operating agreement, but the LLC is not required to have an operating agreement. But it is highly recommended, especially if you're thinking about growing the company and bringing on additional members. If you're going from a single member to a multi-member, meaning you're the only person of your LLC, maybe you don't need an operating agreement, right? Maybe you don't need to pay an attorney to put that all together. You're just operating. You might have a few folks in the office, whatever it might be. You don't really need an operating agreement because you're making all the decisions. Once you grow and you start adding members, right? Or even on the outset, if you have several members, you're going to want to think about an operating agreement. It tells you how the company operates. It tells you how a member can sell their interest in the company. It tells you how to kick a member out of a company. It tells you how the voting is done, whether it be by simple majority or a super majority that would be defined in the contract, i.e. the operating agreement. It's very important to have these things once you start to grow or you add members. Internally as well, like with an LLC, you're going to be wanting to think about other matters of protection. So third-party contracts or employment contracts. Briefly, employment contracts, people typically refer to them as non-competes. Non-competes are a restrictive covenant, one of several. Covenant not to solicit, covenant not to interfere, and then confidentiality. These things would be very, very important to protect the entity, i.e. your LLC. Like, you're putting a lot of work, you're working late hours, you're putting together the super special sauce, and you don't want employees to come in, take that information, give it out to your competitors, or possibly just leave and start their own company that does exactly what you want to do. So you want to make sure that you have those protections in place. Those protections are also in place for other members within your entity. So that operating agreement can actually say, the members shall not compete against each other, shall not essentially steal contracts, contacts, etc., and go and open up another shop right down the street. You can put those in place. The reasonableness of those documents is typically what would be tested or disputed. Time and territory is what we normally think of with regard to restrictive covenants, such as the entire state of North Carolina for roughly 1 year, meaning you can't operate or work for a competitor or create a competing business for 1 year within North Carolina, or something to that effect, whatever might make sense for your business. Third-party contracts is where you're talking more about liability with third parties, meaning whether it be vendors or even clients. Obviously, you need clients to come in, purchase your services or your products or whatever it is that you're selling, but you also need to make sure that those contracts are buttoned up pretty tight so that everybody knows, well, my liability ends here, my obligations start and end here, etc. And therefore, everybody knows where they're supposed to be playing on what field. If those contracts are loose, you see a lot of handwritten things where you fill in blanks and so forth. That's all good and well, and it could work perfectly fine. But you really want to go through those contracts to make sure that everything is, payment terms, price, etc., defaults, interest rates, indemnification, meaning, if something happens, I'll indemnify you only to a certain extent if there's like gross negligence or something to that extent. Something just to be thinking about. The one thing that's really important is litigation. So here at our office, we handle not only transactional work for businesses, meaning contracts, employment contracts, operating agreements, formation, all that sort of stuff. But we also do a lot of litigation. But our recommendation is always to stay out of the courtroom. So when we work with companies, we try to make sure that we're setting them up in a way that would limit their exposure or risk to go to litigation, i.e. lawsuit. The reason is because that little third button right there says litigation is expensive. It is. No way around it. It will be. So ideally, if you can avoid litigation by being set up correctly and the contracts are in place correctly and it insulates you from that as much as possible, that's what you want to do. Obviously, there's no guarantee that somebody's not going to sue you, whether it's valid or not. It's something that could happen. If you do have, depending upon your business, you may want to have some type of insurance in play, not only just general liability for people within your office, including like workers' comp, but you may want to have insurance that covers what you do as a business so that an insurance policy will step in and either cover whatever damages may result from a lawsuit, money that you might owe a third party for something you may have done wrong, whether you agree with it or not, as well as maybe an umbrella policy. What I would suggest is a lot of people always overlook insurance on the front end, and people also say, well, I don't think it's going to happen to me, so I'm going to kind of skip the lawyer route, not worry so much about my contracts or my operating agreement, and I'm just going to start moving forward and providing my service, and I think I'll be okay. And that's typically where we see people getting into trouble, especially if it goes on for a period of years. As you're growing, it's tough to manage a business as it grows. So you overlook like all the documents you don't have, or the fact that your contracts are weak, or that there's a practice going on within your company that's setting yourself up for a possible lawsuit, whether it be internally by an employee or obviously a third party. So you really do want to sit down with an attorney, maybe do like a checkup. So on the front end, if you set up your company on your own, great. But maybe every once in a while, sit down with an attorney and say, here's a handful of contracts I've got going on. What are your thoughts on these? And just do a tune-up. You don't necessarily need to put an attorney on retainer unless you truly want to. But that would be helpful maybe to do, just so you can always kind of keep an eye on things and how the environment's going and the litigious nature that is sometimes the legal field. The last thing that is it's not a legality, it's something that Tara and I will briefly hit on here is, well, great, you started a business and now it's growing. You're all by yourself, maybe as a single member LLC. Aside from the legalities of an operating agreement, what's in there and what do my employment contracts look like and what should the restricted covenants be between the company and its employees or the company and its members? Well, should I grow my business, right? So the business is essentially your livelihood. You put a bunch of time into it. It's potentially everything for you. And as you want to grow, maybe other people come around and they say, I'd like to join your company. I want to become a member, or you want to offer it to somebody. Things that you should be thinking about is one of which is touched on a blog post that was written by my partner, Brian Tyson, on the things you should be considering before you add new partners and members and so forth. It's just simple things such as, and Tara will go a little bit further for me, but it's things such as, do we even get along? Do we have the same vision for our company, right? You may be here, but what's the growth model? What's the 5, 10, 15-year plan? What type of succession planning do you have when you want to retire? What are you going to do about selling it with that succession plan? Like, make sure that you have a like-minded sort of partner or members that come in, because if you have these differences, you'll get to this point where it's possibly in an intersection, and you want to go left and they want to go right, but the business maybe doesn't want to operate that way, or you don't want to operate it that way. And now, regrettably, you've got a partner or a member, and it's not working. And then, do you have an operating agreement? What does it say about being able to move forward, right? How do you sell your membership interest? What are the rights there? And at the same time, like, just the internal frustrations that might result from not being on the same page with your new members as you grow from a single to a multi-member, whether it be 2, 3, 4, 5, or 20 or 30. You want to make sure that the business purpose is very clearly stated. Everybody's on board. You know what you're trying to accomplish. What are the strategies? What does that growth model look like? And what are you trying to work to attain? Tara, you may have some other ideas. That's for me is like, who are you going to bring in? Are you all trying to accomplish the same thing? But there might be some other things that people should be considering before you actually go from a single to a multi-member LLC, meaning you're allowing other people to come into something that you've created. Things such as, I don't know, remote ability today is very important given COVID, right? I mean, Tara, what are your thoughts on other things that business owners should be thinking about with regard to bringing on new members into an LLC or additional shareholders or owners of a company.
Right. I just think that in addition to what you have said, if you're going to bring on new members into your company, it's important that you get along beyond a surface level. Is this someone that you feel comfortable making strategic business decisions moving forward with? And like you said, remotability is important today. And I think that it's important to sit down with this person and have in-depth conversations. If you were a part of this business, where do you see it 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 3 weeks from now? And does that align with what your vision for the company is? Because before you bring someone else in, you and the other members of your company are making all of those decisions. But once you bring this other person in, they are forever and ever a part of those decisions until, pursuant to whatever agreements or documents you have in place, they are no longer a part of the business. So it's just, you have to think about it like a marriage, but almost more than that, because there are ironclad documents that are going to govern how long you have to be intertwined with this person moving forward. So I think it's really important to consider all of those things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. In fact, it goes back to maybe where you should start with your company is maybe not overlooking the importance of the operating agreement, right? If you're thinking that you're going to expand or add members in the future, if you're going from single to multi-member, right? So it's just you and now other people are joining the party, you really want to make sure that operating agreement possibly protects you, right? Not to the disadvantage of other members, but you want to make sure that the company is set up in a way that you want it to operate, meaning, buyouts, triggering events of buy sells, are there going to be some founding member provisions, et cetera, that might be more to your advantage, that are available to you given your years of hard work into this company. So it's always a good idea, in my opinion, that before you ever let a new member in, be thinking about, well, what do my documents say? I need to not only protect the company, but myself, just in case it doesn't work out. And it doesn't always work out. I hope it does, but it doesn't always. You want this document to be there to be able to protect the company and likely you, because you are the company for the vast majority of this time before obviously somebody else joins. That's something you should really be thinking about. So maybe you don't have an operating agreement on day one, but as you're starting to grow and you're trying to manage that growth, and maybe employees, or you've got this great employee that maybe he or she should have a certain percentage in the company, that's great. But make sure you're getting those documents in place before that actually happens and before that offer happens, because most people, when they're offered membership interest into an LLC or shares into a company that might be closely held, that person may know to say, yeah, I'm very interested, but can I see all your corporate governance documents aside from your financials? So they're going to want to see all that. And if you don't have one, then the negotiation begins on what that should look like, especially from the exit or the succession planning of any member leaving the company. So you want to have that in place before you might even want to make that offer, to be honest with you. You think that's a wise decision, Tara, or no?
To have those documents in place beforehand?
Yep.
Oh, absolutely. I would think if you are considering expanding, that before you do that, you have them in place. I firmly believe in protecting yourself and your business. And I think that the best way to do that is to have in place what you think is best moving forward. And ideally, you're going to find someone that aligns with that. And the way that you can make sure of that is whenever you're giving them those corporate governance documents to look over, are they okay with it? And if not, okay, maybe it's not a good match. And that's how that helps you whenever you're expanding your business, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. These are all really good points. I think one thing you and I would both agree on is that there's so much more to this. We're trying to keep these webcasts and these podcasts to a manageable amount where somebody might be interested in actually sitting down and listening to it. But there's just a tremendous amount of more information out there and options that people should consider when they're not only starting a business, but growing it. And you should probably have conversations with attorneys, including CPAs from a taxation standpoint, as you grow. If you're either going to go from an S corp or to a partnership, and they're taxed much differently, but they have a lot of different types of flexibility. So there's a lot more that should go into this consideration, far more than this relatively short webinar. But if you're thinking about these things, again, maybe reach out to an attorney, sit down, have a quick consultation, run through it. Attorneys that handle business transactional matters should be able to answer the very simple questions to point you in the right direction. If you need legal representation at that point in time, obviously have that conversation with them. And then, if you're not being directed to your CPA, you should be. If you do not have a CPA, you should. And if you'd like to be connected with a CPA, obviously reach out to us. We've got several that we work with that are just fantastic. And we'd be happy to put you in touch with those folks that handle business and corporate sort of transactional matters with regard to taxes. But aside from that, if there's any other questions that we may have that may have been raised based on some of the comments that Tara and I have made in this, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our emails are right there on the screen, phone numbers right there. Feel free to call. Somebody will be able to find a time for you to hop on one of our calendars to talk with us and walk you through the process of what that intake would look like. What that intake would look like here at our office. Also, we've got the website. So you can go to the website. There's a bunch of blogs on there, and that might actually be able to help you out as well. But we're always here to help. Reach out to us if you'd like to. Otherwise, we wish you the best of luck, and thanks for tuning into this webinar.